Okay, for this section we're going to talk a little bit more about how to edit some of the existing pages and how to create new pages, and specifically I'm going to show you two different ways of how you can go about creating new pages. So if you go to your home page of your school site, and we're going to be using our demo site here, the School of Rock. So the first thing I want to show you, because it always comes up, it seems like we get a lot of heat tickets that are related to this, is people, they'll go into a page and they're going to try to edit the page and they won't be able to edit the page. When you first go into a page, you have two options when you want to edit it. There's this little edit button up here on this side, and there's also a drop-down list, this gear, which is actually the old style settings button, but you no longer have a site settings button or the word settings. This little gear, when you click on that, it's going to give you a drop-down. Now, if you have a situation where the edit page does not take you into edit mode, or the edit page drop down in this list here is grayed out, that just simply means that someone else is editing the page. Now when that happens, you should also see a yellow bar across the top, and that yellow bar will tell you who has the page checked out. If it doesn't tell you there, the other option that you have is you could come down to site contents, and within site contents you want to look for site pages, which in this case is down here towards the bottom of my list. And it's going to give me a listing of all the pages that are in the existing site. And I should be able to look at this and find out if it's checked out, because if there's no little green box in the lower right hand corner, that page has not been checked out. It's not being edited. None of these pages are currently being edited by anyone. But if they had a little green box, that probably means someone's checked it out and they're trying to make changes. So that's another way you can find out if someone else has that page currently open. But let's go back to, and I'm just going to use the back button to do this. I'm going to go back up to my home page, and I'm going to go into edit mode. Once I'm in edit mode, the page is actually divided up into several sections, and these are individual web parts. You have a school announcements in the top center. You have a school calendar immediately below that. To the right side of that, if I scroll over horizontally, there's an image that's being displayed, and then school links, which is one of the summary links web parts. You can have other web parts. This is what we put on the page initially to get you started. But if you want to go in and you want to add something else, you certainly can. A lot of the web parts that you're going to see here are very similar if you've been working on your school outward facing site with 2010. All those web parts that you had there, pretty much all of them, there's only one or two exceptions, but the major ones are exactly the same. So if you wanted to put another content editor web part out there, if you wanted, which is the most common one, if you wanted to put some other summary links or content query, all of those web parts still exist, and you can put them onto the page that you want. If there's something that you wanted to edit, if I scroll back up to the top, in this particular box up here, this is actually not a content editor web part. This is actually displaying a list. So in this particular case, it's going out and it's pulling the school announcements list, and it will display the list there. Now right now there's no announcements there, but you see it has a button. It says add, or it just says new announcement, and a plus sign with a circle. That's indicating that you want to add a new announcement to the announcements list. So if you have the rights to be able to add things to your list, you'll be able to click on that button and it will add it. And you'll get two fields, a title field and a body field. For instance, and I'll go through, and you can do this on your own if you'd like. Just remember, if you want to keep the message, fine. If you don't want to keep it, remember to get rid of it. So I'm going to put a title in, and I'm going to say first class of wave 2. And in here I would put in, perhaps I would add the agenda here. And then you could put an expiration date. And let's say I wanted it to expire on the 31st of January. Now, just putting an expiration date in the announcements doesn't do a whole lot for you. It's not an automatic removal. But what you can do is you can define for that particular list view a filter so that it only displays things that are less than the expiration date. Or today's, at the expiration, I'm sorry, let me do that again. That the expiration date is less than the current date. And the current date is specified by the keyword today in square quotes, square brackets. So you can put the information in for your announcement, save it, and then it will appear in the home page. Now, I think when you heard Doug talk earlier, he has a separate list where anybody in the school can go in and submit things, and then he has a central person adding it to the announcements list. You can do it that way as well. You don't necessarily want everyone to modify the announcements on the home page because who knows what they're going to add.
So when somebody who's defined as a visitor goes into the site, is that added an announcement? That's not there, right?
Nope, we don't see that.
Okay, good.
The question, and I'm going to repeat the question if I remember because they don't always hear the question. The question was if someone else that doesn't have rights to add announcements, when they come into the home page, do they see the add new announcements button? No, they do not. The only reason we see it is because we're logged in as owners of these sites that we're working with right now. But you still want to probably follow Doug's suggestion and create a separate list somewhere else in one of the other pages so that people can submit suggestions, shall we call it, for school announcements, and then you can have a central person, maybe someone in the office that goes through and determines which of those announcements really gets added. The same is true for the calendar. The calendar immediately below currently is showing the month of January. You can go through and you can hover over any of the days, and if you're the owner, notice that there's a plus add in the bottom corner. And I'm not going to go through all these in detail. We'll have some playtime where you can come back and play with some of this stuff. I'm just showing you where to find some of it. If you're an owner, you don't have to actually go out to the calendar list. You can just go to the calendar itself on that page, click on the plus sign, and it'll give you a dialog that will allow you to add an event to that particular day. Now, yes, you can go out to the list itself and add the items that way, but some people prefer to do it this way. We mentioned earlier that you can do a sync to Outlook. If we have time later at the end of the day, we'll show you how you can sync it with Outlook. I don't want to diverge too much right now. But you can sync with Outlook. The advantage of syncing with Outlook is if you have this particular calendar side by side with another calendar that you've been keeping in Outlook, maybe the secretary of your school keeps a school calendar, you can actually drag and drop events between the two, and you don't have to re-enter them.
You never have to come to this site. You can do right in your Outlook.
And if we don't get a chance to show, we have videos that you can find on the YouTube channel. We have different playlists. There's one specifically for collaboration 2013.
I'll play around with this as you're showing us. You showed us how to add an announcement. I created one. You're going to take it away.
You want to take away an announcement? The best thing to do to take away an announcement is to go to Site Contents.
Yeah, right, 3 dots.
There's so many different ways, I know. And what Mike Adani just said is you can click on the 3 dots here. You can go to Site Contents. Depends on what you're used to. The 3 dots is a new 2013 feature. If you go to Site Contents, just so you know where things are located, and look for where the announcements are stored, down here it says School Announcements. Let me bring it up a little higher. Go to School Announcements, and you'll see the one announcement that was there. Again, you get the 3 dots. So either way, you're going to wind up going to the 3 dots. When you click on that, you're going to get a drop-down list, and then you can delete the item. So it depends which way you prefer to do it. If you're familiar with the old way of doing it, because you edited back in WSS days, or you were doing things with the outward-facing website, it doesn't really matter. You're going to get to the same point. It really doesn't matter.
You can also put a checkbox next to the cancel link. You can also hit the checkbox next to the dot. So say you have multiple you want to delete. You just put a checkbox, click on the items tab, items, and then hit delete. So then if you have like 5 or 6 and you want to delete at once, you You just put a checkbox next to it and hit that and delete, and then it deletes multiple.
So you should set your expiration date to the date that it's gonna start, so it's appearing.
Correct. You don't want to, but that only works if you're using filtered views. Like Mike talked about earlier, I think we have a video on the filtered views, don't we, or at least documentation on it?
The question was, do we have a video on filtered views? I don't know if we have a video. I think it's been covered in one of the newsletters. We also put out a newsletter. It comes out once a month. And in portalproject.ocps.net, in the left-hand side, you'll see a reference to archive for the newsletters, and there's also an index for the newsletter articles. And you might want to check those as well, because a lot of the stuff has been talked about over the past 4 or 5 years in the newsletters as well.
But if you're using announcements and you put an expiration date, you don't really have to go back and delete it, because it's not going to be shown on that list.
As long as you use a filtered list.
Correct.
So yeah, so that's a good website to know. It's portalproject.ocps.net.
It was one of the ones that was listed.
And then the top right is also a sign up for the newsletter, so you'll get a monthly newsletter from us. And then the archive is also listed, so you can look all the way back to 2009. Yeah, 2009. And they're all archived and broken down by article.
Let me just go back to, I'm going to show you where you can go through and define the filtered list quickly, just so that you know where it's located at. When you go to the list itself, by going through the site contents being over here on the left-hand side, or through the list in the gear drop-down site contents. But when you get to the list itself, instead of playing with an individual list item, open up the list ribbon, go to list settings. At the bottom of list settings are going to be all the views that have been defined. Now, I'm not sure which one was being used on the page. I'm going to take a guess. I'm going to say it was the web view. May not have been. Doesn't matter. I'm just going to show you where to change the settings. This is going to essentially come through and show you scroll down too far. What columns were included, what the order of the columns are. This is the relative position. So if I wanted to add something else, like the expiration date, I could select it. And I don't have to worry about changing this 10 to a 3. As soon as you select something that's way at the bottom of the list, once you save it, it will automatically renumber things for you. Even if I were changing that 10 to a 1 to make it the first item, it would automatically change title and body to 2 and 3. It wouldn't rebuild the list, but it will display it correctly the next time that you open the list. It will have them in order. So you can add things that you might want to display if you don't have everything displayed. And there's no reason to display everything. You can define the sort order. So for any given list, you can select one of the fields and say that that's the way that you're going to sort it. This particular list was sorted based upon the creation date of the announcement. You could also have alphabetical if you preferred, or some other method. It's totally up to you how you want to sort it. But it's not the sort that I'm worried about. I want to come down here to filter, and you can see here that it's already in. The filter's already defined. It's only going to show items where the expired date is greater than today. So once the expired date passes, in other words, since I selected January 31st for that particular item, once we hit February 2nd, that expired date is going to be less than today, and it's no longer going to show. Does that make sense? So you won't have to worry about going and removing things from the announcements list if you put an expired date in. And you notice this is what I was saying about the keyword today. That's its way of knowing whatever today's date is, it uses that date for today.
And it gives you a little bit of a hint on where it says filter on the left-hand side. You can use the bracketed today and me. Me means you. So when you log in, you see it this way. But if somebody else logs in, they see me, it's their view.
Actually, there's even a better thing for me. And the better thing is, and this gets into that project management stuff I talked about before, if you start using this to assign tasks to different members of your school, then when they log in, you can have a filter that says only show the tasks assigned to me. They won't see all the other tasks. They only see their tasks. And that's a great way of using me. So I'm going to back out of this since I really don't want to make any changes here. I'm going to go back up to the home page. Now, if I wanted to add another page to this site, like I said, there's a couple different ways to do it. The first way that you might want to do it is if you come to the gear, you see this option, add a page. If I click add a page, it's going to ask me what does the page name, what is it going to be? And I'm going to call it reservations. Doesn't matter what's going to be on the page for now. And click create. And it will create a page, and by default it's going to have one area in which you can put in web parts or text or whatever you want. Now I'm going to talk a little bit more about wiki pages in a minute, or a couple minutes from now, but the point I want to make right now immediately is I can just start typing. Whatever I want to put in, I can start typing. I can come up here and I can format any of the text any way I want. Sort of like the same commands you have in Word. I can make it bold. I can change the font. Change the font size. Underline it. Whatever I wanted to do. So in terms of putting content on a page, you don't necessarily need the content editor web part. You can just go into the content area provided for a new page and start putting text in. Now, as I said, we only have one content area, and that's the default. And some people, that's okay. They'll deal with just a single content area because there are some tricks that you can play. If the old style way of creating web pages, if people remember that, you would go through and you, instead of just working with the page directly, you would come up to the insert ribbon. As soon as I find where the mouse went. There it is. Come up to the insert ribbon, and these are things I can insert inside the content area. I can insert tables, pictures, videos, links, and then the web parts, the various web parts that you can put on a page. But what some people have done in the past, the old way of creating pages, was to put a table in. I'm going to take a 3x3 table, and you can see a grid there on the screen. And they would put in different content in different cells. And then there's a way that you can go through with the table design, and you can get rid of using one of the styles. And the table design is just another ribbon once you're inside of a table. And change the style to clear so that you don't see the lines. But while you're working on it, obviously you do want to see the lines because you want to know what cell you're in. And then within that cell, you can put in text. You can insert pictures. You can put links in. You can customize it any way you want. Then when you get rid of the lines, it looks like you have this very complex formatted page. But you're really dealing with just content inside of a table. That's one way that you can do it. I'm going to temporarily get rid of this table because I don't really need it. And instead I'm going to come up here to where it says text layout. Text layout shows you some of the other options for the way that you can have content areas defined. And this is very similar to what you had before when you were doing your outward-facing web pages, where you had different options. And the default's going to be always the one at the top, the one column. But you could have a column with a sidebar. You could have two columns. You could have two columns with headers. Basically, any of those options that you want. Now, my point was by showing you the table first and putting the table in that one column, I can simulate all of those. By just putting in a table, merging some of the cells together, and then putting text in other cells, I can simulate all of those plus any number of more. I can make it as complex as I want. So either way, That's how you go about putting the content in if you're just putting in text. And if you want to do something other than text, I'm just going to leave it one column. But you can also go out to web parts. And you can go down through the list of all the web parts that are available. And under apps, for some reason, all lists and libraries are called apps. Don't ask why. Microsoft decided that in their infinite wisdom in 2013, that all lists and all libraries are going to be apps. So you see there the school announcements. That's how school announcements showed up, because it was inserted as an app into a content area. But you have all the other ones that you might have been familiar with from before. If I go down to media and content, you have the page viewer, the content editor, which you probably used before, the image viewer. There's a media web part, which is one way of putting different podcasts or even videos inside of a page. There's other options in here, which we may get into at a later point, not today, but maybe in some of the other classes, because I've used some of these. Some of them are really interesting. Some of them take a lot of practice to get used to. For instance, how do you work with Excel and display an Excel page inside one of your SharePoint pages? I mentioned that a little bit earlier. So basically, this is how you can go through and you can add other content inside the page. But if you're just doing simple content, just text, don't worry about all the other web parts. Don't even put in a content editor web part. Just type in your text. Does that kind of make sense? When you're done with your page, right now I don't have it checked out. You might say, well, how am I editing it without checking it out? First, I want to mention the fact that if you don't check out a page, there's a default lock that Microsoft puts on the page so that other people should not be able to edit it. However, that default lock, if I don't touch anything, if I go away for maybe a half hour, that default lock goes away. And if someone else can come back in and start editing that page, if they save their changes, I lose mine at that point.
Why this is set up this way is because these are collaboration pages. Where collaboration by default doesn't require check and check out like publishing does. Like you do on like your outward facing school sites requires a checkout to do anything. That's just standard. But collaboration by default. So if you are working on it and you want to make sure nobody does anything, check it out. It's not automatic, but you can check it out.
And we could have made it automatic. And actually in the publishing pages, we made it so that it was automatic. It's not that publishing by default has checkout, but there's an option that we turn on that makes it required that all pages must be checked out to be edited. It's just common practice in collaboration not to do a check-in, check-out. If you don't like that, all you'd have to do is go into the pages library and there's a setting in there. Let us know and we can walk you through the steps. It's not that bad. So once I finished making my changes, because I didn't have it officially checked out, I don't have to check it back in. All I have to do is click save. And even under save, there's a couple of options. You have save by itself, save and keep editing, and then stop editing. And save by itself, it saves it and it's going to go back out of that particular mode and it's going to be just displaying the view of the page. Save and keep editing. If you know you've been making a lot of changes and you're a little bit concerned that if the system dies for some reason, you could lose everything, you might want to save and edit periodically, but keep on editing because you're really not done. But you want to make sure that everything you've done up to that point has been saved. Stop editing is almost like a cancel. You're trying to get out. You're not going to keep any of your changes. Now, when you do a check in and check out, if you check something out, you can just very quickly get rid of all your changes by saying discard the checkout. And that's another good reason for using check in, check out, because it makes it a little bit easier for people to understand discard checkout means it's gone. If you say stop editing, but prior to that you said save and keep editing, anything that you previously saved is still saved. Whereas if you do check in and check out, if you discard the checkout, anything that you've done up to that point is gone. So pretty much that's one way of creating pages. Does that kind of make sense?